So we all know what this is, and we know what it's used for. In fact, Rose George calls it the big necessity. It's something each of us does every day, but I wonder whether most of us really think about it. I'm not talking about the process, doing what you gotta do, cleaning up afterwards, washing your hands as part of good hygiene. I'm talking about what we do the way that we do it. Using a conventional flush toilet, an outhouse, a pit latrine, a hole, or any other system in which what we excrete is considered waste that needs to be disposed of. What if we started thinking about our excrement not as waste to be disposed of, but as a resource to be harvested? If we thought about it in this way, our thinking would be aligned with that of Joseph Jenkins. He refers to harvested human excrement as humanure. Basically, humanure is composted human manure. According to Jenkins, much of our waste, including human manure, consists of organic matter that should be returned to the soil. This organic matter is very valuable agriculturally. Let's face it, we all like to eat, and I'd even go so far as to say that most of us would prefer to eat foods that are healthy, nutritious, and organically grown. But homestead food production isn't the only benefit of composted humanure. When recycled for a minimum of 12 months, composted humanure, like other composted organic matter, aids the formation of good granular soil structure through the creation of moisture-rich humus, replenishing the soil's fertility and making it vibrant with all kinds of microorganisms and nutrients. And of course, soil fertility may mean increased protection from erosion, droughts, and toxins, as well as improved aeration for maintaining soil productivity. And I can tell you that those in favor of using composting toilets appreciate the economic gain. There's the reduction of public water usage, lowering one's monthly water bill. As well, there's savings in terms of not having to spend additional money on fertilizer, including its cost, the cost of fuel to go and get it, or the cost of transportation and labor to have it delivered. Also, growing all sorts of delicious fruits and veggies and legumes at home using composted humanure equates to more money in one's pocket, which can be used for other things like whatever. If we're okay with this sort of thinking, which is consistent with the thinking of those in favor of promoting environmental sustainability, then why do most of us continue to flush valuable resources down the toilet as opposed to using composting toilets? Well, I imagine that for many of us, it has nothing to do with economic, environmental, or even technological factors, but more so to do with issues stemming from a social context. Let's consider 7 different perceived social barriers to using composting toilets and what several users of composting toilets recommend for overcoming these barriers.
The key to having a healthy compost system is air circulation and using a cover material. And that's true for humanure composting as well. And that really addresses the issue of smell. So all you need to do is add a vent, a simple vent to your composting toilet to provide air circulation. And then every time you use the composting toilet, you add a cover material, and that can be sawdust or wood chips or leaf litter or shredded paper. And that really helps mask the smell, but also provide the carbon material needed to have a healthy compost pile.
So people's worries about composting toilets primarily stem from 2 issues. I think the first is that you think you're going to get sick from poop in your toilet and that this is a dangerous practice. And then the second issue is that you're going to have to touch or see or smell or basically handle human shit. So addressing the issue of safety, the basic premise of most dry composting toilets is that human excrement decomposes aerobically to yield humus. So this decomposition process can reach up to 150 degrees Fahrenheit, which means all these harmful pathogens are actually killed off, making it a very safe thing that you're going to be handling. The humus ends up being a wonderful soil amendment, and it doesn't resemble fresh feces in the slightest. You're absolutely not going to be touching your poop at the end of this. As far as sight and smell, it takes very little effort to throw sawdust or some other carbon-rich substrate when you're done using the toilet. So instead of flushing, you're throwing substrate on. Scientifically, a properly functioning composting toilet isn't unsanitary, but you can also aid in that perception by ensuring that the process of using the toilet is a pleasant one. So rather than be making it feel like an outhouse, having it feel like a really nice place with a convenient hand washing station can go a long way in aiding in the sanitary perception. One of the nicest composting toilets I used had a wind chime in it, and it was absolutely delightful. We also have this perception that the flush toilet is a more sanitary option, but let's say in places like India, only about 30% of the sewage from flush toilets in towns and cities is treated, and about 26 billion liters of untreated wastewater flows into rivers and coastal waters every day. So in that case, the composting toilet is actually a much more sanitary option to dispose safely and on site.
Okay, if you're looking at whether or not composting toilets are legal, the first thing is look at your local laws. If they are illegal, you then want to see why is that the case. Talk to your Department of Environmental Quality and find out what is needed in a composting toilet so it will be legal and it will be safe and pose no health risks. So for example, they may not want leachate to go into the soil. Can you create a toilet that won't allow that to occur? There might be the concern of insects or animals getting into the human waste before it's composted. How can you design the toilet so there won't be any insects or critters getting into the mix that can then come into contact with people? And look for templates elsewhere, such as in the state of Queensland, Australia, where 3 homemade composting toilet systems are approved for permit. Very easy system now. And that was all due to studies done by the University of Lismore.
So one way to combat inhibitions regarding composting toilets and the use of them is to provide a setting that is more enjoyable to use than a conventional toilet, that makes it where it's much more desirable to use. And so that would mean providing adequate screening for any privacy needs, putting on a radio, having a bubbling fountain, and something to mask and provide that background noise.
With our modern technology, we've created systems where we put our waste, our human waste, into our drinking water. Actually, the water that's in your toilet is water that is drinking water quality, and we're adding our human waste to that and then working hard to get it back out, creating much more problems than we need to. Whereas composting toilets turn that human waste into a resource. It becomes fertile compost that we can use to grow things.
Okay, if you've got insects in a composting toilet, how are they getting in? That's what you want to address. Try and deny them entry. If they do get entry, then you have to figure out a way, how can you trap them? Simple solar fly traps are one way. There's other methodologies, but the first step is try and keep them out as much as possible in the first place, and then figure out a mechanism by which you can deal with them once they're in. Obviously, flies, the ones that will travel great distances, are the biggest problem. Dung beetles might actually be a real positive. They speed up decomposition.
So the taboo issue is interesting because in places like India and Burkina Faso, there are differences between the urban and rural perspectives. In rural areas, most villages farm, and so they understand the value of compost inherently for their fields. They pay for fertilizer currently, and so the idea of a free resource is a really powerful idea for them. They're used to working with cow dung for earthen stoves and manure for their fields, so there seems to be less of a taboo with handling the compost. Now, one way to overcome this taboo in urban areas and in general is to focus on the promotion of the output compost as a valuable resource. For example, there's a nonprofit in India that built a public composting toilet in an urban setting and then paid everyone to come and use it, really making it a very, very popular place, and then use the compost for an adjacent garden. Now, while it's important to respect cultural norms, you really also have to be aware that taboos do shift and change over time. And we can aid in that shift in subtle ways just by changing the terminology. Right now, we refer to excrement and urine as human waste for the most part. And this really reinforces the idea that there's something rather suspicious about working with it. Who would want to work with waste? But by referring to it as, say, humanure, you're subconsciously reinforcing it as a really valuable resource. Language really does matter.
So, what do you think? I imagine that for those of you who are in favor of using composting toilets for reasons addressed in this video or others, this has supported your thinking as to the relative importance and advantages of composted humanure. And I hope that for those of you who have been somewhat hesitant about this fertility-enhancing recycled resource for reasons associated with any of the 7 social barriers addressed in this video or others, the suggestions offered for overcoming these barriers has challenged your thinking, or at the very least, generated enough interest to start having conversations about and begin doing more extensive research on composting toilets. As one who has recently come to appreciate the value in harvesting humanure, I can tell you that my thinking as to the use of composting toilets is changing. So, if a big city girl such as myself can overcome the barrier that kept me seated for most of my life on a conventional flush toilet, why can't you?